what's missing, I think, is leaders thinking about themselves, first of all. So when I've had conversations in leadership teams around how are we doing? And it's about the people, and then I'll try and bring it back, but how are you doing? And it feels like that's very difficult to do.
The purpose of the meeting is to combine our thinking together to think about the effects that this virus has had on the working world, and in particular on us at Investec, and some of the things that we've had to do to adjust the working place and the mindsets of our people to deal with it. So we've got a real combination of brains, if you like, on how to think about what this means for us and what this epidemic is going to mean for the world of work into the future.
There's so much going on for people. And I think what it's requiring of the organization is a huge amount of leadership. And the conundrum here is we need leaders to really lean in and be able to lead in this virtual world that we find ourselves. And at the same time, for the organization to think of the support mechanisms for the leadership teams themselves. There's this huge cycle of support that needs to exist to get the organization to continue in terms of performance, but just in terms of the norm of our culture, which is a huge amount of care and concern for people. And I think it's requiring a different leadership style than we've naturally always seen, which has been around driving this high level of performance, high level of activity and efficiency, to a far softer approach at times around really understanding the context that people are finding themselves within, and allowing us to see a lot of patience and a lot of empathy from the leaders in the organization. And some are doing it exceptionally well, and at other times we're seeing leaders battle. The leaders that like quite a lot of control or leadership style that likes to micromanage, I think they're really battling with understanding what true value is going to mean during this period of time as well.
Let me ask you, Dip, in the United Kingdom, and you're also been looking through at India. What have you been seeing along these lines from an OD point of view?
What's missing, I think, is leaders thinking about themselves, first of all. So when I've had conversations in leadership teams around how are we doing? And it's about the people, and then I'll try and bring it back, but how are you doing? And it feels like that's very difficult to do. There's a bit of an allergy to wanting to go there and really think about, well, how are we? How are we coping? And it's like, yeah, we're fine. And then there's a role modeling aspect to that. So we are trying to say to people, in order for this to be sustainable, remember to take breaks, remember to switch off from your machines. Although there's more flexibility, you can't just be on your laptops 24/7. And yet leaders aren't doing it themselves because they're in the same bind of, we've just got to keep busy, we've just got to keep on. And that's never going to be sustainable. So I have a big concern around burnout throughout our organization.
One of your points you said there was what I would call a kind of heroic survival activity, where we see leaders that, go very, very fast into task, and teams, everyone's into task as a heroic movement to manage the situation. So I wonder if I can ask you, Peter, from an OD perspective, what is going on here?
A very important piece that we can help with at the moment is for leaders to learn about how to provide containment. And I think when the anxiety is this high, the natural reaction is to go into paternal containment. That's the one part. That is actually putting structure in, some clear rules and regulations so people feel a little bit more contained. And I think that is helpful in the initial phase because it gives structure, and we know structure contains anxiety. But now we also need to help these leaders to move to maternal containment, which is really being able to listen to people, to their experiences, their emotions. And I think that is the part that we need to help with. I think we need to help them to develop the skills, the competence to have these kinds of deep conversations where there's no clear answers, when there's no specific behaviors that you need to do or change, or there's no solutions, but just being able to listen. What also concerns me at this point in time is I think this started off as a crisis. And it's all around the world, it is a crisis. And what we know about a crisis is normally people's coping mechanisms actually still work. My concern is when, and this has already moved from a crisis into a trauma. When people start to die in our families, pass away, then we're really going to see a different kind of behavior. The crisis, when it escalates to trauma, then we will see some defense mechanisms fail. And I think that is when what we need to gear up for and help our leaders to support in those circumstances.
What are we going to see behaviorally? What do you predict?
I do think there are some basic processes that we actually see when people go through trauma. And a very basic one, for example, is being out of control. And that out of controlness is across different areas. So my body could feel out of control. Pains in my body, I'm sitting, in the way that we work at the moment, all the stress of work. My mind feels a little bit out of control. It's difficult to concentrate on the work, for example, abstract thinking. I think also emotionally I feel out of control because my emotions are so intense and there's so much anger. So there's a theme of out of controlness. The other theme that I'm starting to pick up also is the theme of vulnerability, feeling exposed as if I can't protect myself anymore. And there's a number of these processes. Anger and frustration is the other one that comes to mind for me. Anger at what has happened, but also frustration because I can't do anything to change it. And those are some of the processes that we will have to help the leaders to manage.
I think Pete raises a really interesting point, and it's something very key that leadership could connect with. Anyone could connect with, and it immediately engenders empathy towards your team members. So I think the three things that we're seeing in this trauma language is high levels of avoidance. That people will either be, deliberately avoidant of dialogue, of the issues, trying to minimize what's happening, and it creates quite a lot of anger around other team members. But it's a natural reaction to this very abnormal response. The second thing I think we're seeing is in opposite of the avoidance is this exceptional hypervigilance. People who want to know every single detail, who constantly send updates and information and the scariest pieces of news, and come onto team chats and are anxious that the organization provides lots of answers and lots of certainty, which of course there isn't. And again, it engenders the same response. People get very irritated with the individual, and there's a lot of fragmentation when that happens. And the third thing we're seeing from both groups is there's some stigmatization, which is very dangerous for the organization. Stigmatization in people, especially towards people who are positive, or people who've been around people who are positive and have inadvertently come into contact with other people around their selfishness, their stupidity, their lack of care. And all of these will create very negative dynamics inside teams. So if we can just recognize where people are operating from, places of a traumatic response, high levels of fear, high levels of uncertainty, really the response that we need specifically from leaders, but from all team members, is empathy. High levels of empathy to where people are coming from, and somewhere in the middle we'll meet to have a meaningful conversation about where we all at.
Les, just to pick up on that, I think there's also something about curiosity. So there's empathy, and there's also, if we can operate with the spirit of curiosity, so what does it mean to you? How does it feel for you? Why do you think you might have reacted in that way? Those kind of questions bring a different response, whereas what often happens is it's full of assumptions of like, well, they're bad, they're stupid, they're irresponsible. And then that curiosity goes and there's no space for empathy then.
Zandi, let me ask you, your role is to look after diversity and inclusion, belonging, etc., what we call BID. What concerns you about the change in the way we are working that has been so sudden with regard to some of the important diversity and inclusion considerations that we've been so focused on for a while now?
Just thinking about sort of the role of the leader, I think, is around understanding and knowing and really knowing who is in your team. So understanding who they are, what their environment, their work environment is like. If we look at us all now, looking quite happy and healthy in quite nice environments, but actually, if you're in a place, particularly in London, for example, you might be in a shared accommodation you might be living in just a couple of rooms, and you don't actually have the physical space to get away and work from home in comfort. So I think in knowing your team, understand that not all homes are equal in terms of infrastructure and setup. I think those are the sorts of things that I've been concerned with, and starting to think about how do we provide and give the support to our leaders, not just our leaders, but also the individuals themselves to be able to speak up.